Would you dare to work the night shift in a store where the lights never stop flickering and the shadows never stop moving? They told me the rules were simple. Rule 1, don't look directly at the man who stands by the freezer. Rule 2, if you hear your name whispered in the aisles, don't answer. Rule 3, whatever you do, never go outside between 3 and 3:15 a.m. But rules are meant to keep you safe. Break even one, and the store won't just take your job, it will take your soul. 6 nights, 6 horrifying encounters, and every shift drags me deeper into a nightmare that feels alive. This isn't just a convenience store in Virginia, it's a doorway. And once you step inside, there's no way back. Good evening, my night owls. Welcome back to Dr. Snooze. You know the rules. Like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the darkness waiting for you here. Tonight, the shadows have a story to tell, and it's dying to keep you awake. I never thought I'd end up working the night shift at a convenience store. Growing up, I always imagined something bigger for myself, something meaningful, even if not glamorous. But life has a way of stripping away dreams and leaving you with whatever's left. For me, what was left was a small, dimly lit store off Route 57 in rural Virginia. The building itself didn't look like much, just a squat rectangle of faded brick with a buzzing neon sign that read, Midway Mart. Half the letters didn't even work anymore. On the first night, I parked my car in the gravel lot and stared at the place, wondering if I should just turn around and quit before I even started. But I needed the money, and night shifts paid extra, so I took a deep breath and walked inside. The smell hit me first. A mix of stale coffee, old mop water, and something faintly metallic that I couldn't quite place. The aisles were narrow, shelves packed with the usual snacks, canned goods, and dusty bottles of soda. Behind the counter was a small bulletin board cluttered with notes and faded flyers. That's where I noticed it. A laminated sheet of paper pinned right in the center. At first, I thought it was some kind of employee handbook or cleaning schedule. But no, it was a list, a very strange list. The words were typed in bold, and a warning was written at the top. Rules for night shift employees. I felt a shiver run through me. Rules? Sure, but why post them like this? I leaned in closer and read the first few lines. 1. Once the clock strikes midnight, lock the front door. Do not open it again for anyone until sunrise. 2. If someone knocks on the glass after midnight, ignore them, no matter how much they beg. 3. Do not go into the stockroom between 3 and 3:33 a.m. 4. If the payphone rings, never answer on the first call. Wait for the second. 5. At 4:15, turn on the TV behind the counter. Leave it on, even if the screen shows static. And the list went on, stranger with each rule. There must have been at least 20. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of elaborate prank. Small towns in Virginia had a reputation for weird humor, and maybe this was their way of hazing new hires. Before I could read the rest, I heard a voice. You must be the new guy. I turned and saw a man stepping out from behind one of the aisles. He was in his late 40s, maybe older, with a tired look in his eyes. His uniform shirt was stained with coffee, and he carried himself with the kind of slow, deliberate movements that spoke of years of exhaustion. Yeah, I said. First night. He nodded, then pointed to the laminated rules. Follow them. Don't ask questions. Don't think you're smarter than the paper. I tried to laugh it off, but his expression didn't change. He wasn't joking. What happens if I don't? I asked. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment he just stared at me. Then he said, You won't make it to your second shift. He walked past me, muttering something under his breath. I wanted to ask more, but something in his tone told me it wouldn't be worth it. Instead, I busied myself with the counter, pretending to check the register, though my hands were trembling slightly. By 11:30, the other guy, his name was Carl, was ready to leave. He gave me a set of keys, told me to lock up in the morning, and reminded me again to follow the rules. Then he left without another word, leaving me alone in the store. The silence was immediate, oppressive. The buzzing of the overhead lights felt louder than it should have. Outside, the lot was empty, the road beyond stretching into the dark woods. No cars, no headlights, just blackness. I spent the first half hour pacing behind the counter, checking the shelves, and convincing myself that everything was normal. That paper of rules sat pinned on the bulletin board, and I couldn't stop glancing at it. By the time the clock ticked to midnight, I felt my chest tighten. I walked to the door, just like the rules said, and turned the key in the lock. The metallic click echoed through the quiet store. I turned back toward the counter, and that's when I heard it. A knock. It was soft at first, like the brush of fingers against glass. I froze. My eyes darted to the door. There was someone standing there. A woman. She looked normal enough, maybe in her 30s, wearing a jacket and jeans. Her hair was damp, as if she'd been caught in the rain, though the sky had been clear when Carl left. "Please," she mouthed through the glass. "Let me in." I swallowed hard. The rules. Rule number 2. Ignore anyone who knocks after midnight. But this was a person. A real person, wasn't it? Her eyes were wide, filled with desperation. She banged on the glass now louder. "Please," she said, her voice muffled but audible. "It's not safe out here." I took a step closer before stopping myself. No. This had to be a prank. Some kind of setup to test me. Maybe Carl was watching, or maybe it was locals messing with me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I gripped the counter for support. The woman's face twisted into something else then. Her eyes seemed darker, her mouth stretching too wide as she pressed her forehead against the glass. "Let me in!" she screamed, the sound vibrating through the door even though it was locked tight. I stumbled backward, my knees nearly giving out. My breath came in sharp gasps, and I clutched the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. Then, as suddenly as it began, the woman was gone. One blink, and the space outside the door was empty. The lot stretched out, still silent, still dark. No sign of her at all. I collapsed onto the stool behind the counter, shaking uncontrollably. The rules hadn't been a joke. They were warnings, and I had barely survived my first test. The rest of the night loomed ahead, and I realized something with growing dread. This wasn't just a job. This was a trap. I don't know how long I sat there behind the counter after she disappeared. My eyes kept flicking to the front door, half expecting her face to appear again against the glass. The silence pressed in heavy, and I swear I could still hear her scream echoing faintly in my ears. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I thought about calling Carl, but what would I even say? "Hey, I think I saw a woman outside who vanished into thin air." No, that would only make me sound insane. I tried to focus on the register, on stocking gum behind the counter, anything to distract myself from what just happened. But the whole time, I felt this gnawing awareness that I wasn't alone. Not in the way you normally feel when you're in a building by yourself, but something deeper, stranger. It was as if the air itself was watching me. Around 1 a.m., the store phone rang. The sound nearly made me jump out of my skin. It was an old beige rotary thing mounted on the wall behind the counter, and the ring was harsh and mechanical, like it belonged to another era. My heart skipped as I stared at it. The rules. Rule number 4. Do not answer the first call. Wait for the second. The phone rang 6 times before stopping. The silence that followed was even worse. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I let it out slowly. I tried to tell myself it was just some drunk dialing the wrong number, but deep down, I knew better. The rules weren't arbitrary. That call had been for me. When the phone rang again, the sound drilled into my skull. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to pick up the receiver. "Hello?" My voice cracked. There was static on the line. Thick, heavy, like listening to a broken radio. I pressed the receiver closer to my ear, and through the static came a voice. Low, male. "You did well with the door," it said. The blood drained from my face. My throat went dry. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. The voice didn't answer right away, just that buzzing crackle of static. Then, "Follow the rules or she'll come back." Click. The line went dead. I slammed the receiver back into place and staggered away from the wall, pressing my palms against the counter to steady myself. My stomach twisted like I was about to be sick. Someone, or something, was watching me, testing me. I wanted to leave right then, but the rules about the door rang in my head. I couldn't open it until sunrise, which meant I was trapped until at least 6 in the morning. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the stained pot on the back counter. It was bitter and cold, but I didn't care. Anything to keep my hands occupied, to keep me from falling apart. By 2 a.m., the silence had started to suffocate me again. I walked the aisles, pretending to check stock. Chips, candy, canned soup, dusty bottles of soda. Normal things. But even surrounded by the mundane, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shelves themselves were leaning in toward me, that the shadows stretched too far between the aisles. I glanced at the bulletin board again. The rules sat there, mocking me. One in particular made my chest tighten. Do not go into the stockroom between 3 and 3:33 a.m. Why those 33 minutes? What was in there? I stared at the back door, a narrow wooden thing with a steel handle, and felt the pull of curiosity. That was always my problem. Curiosity. Even as fear twisted through me, part of me wanted to open that door just to prove the rules were wrong. But then I remembered the woman's face at the glass, her mouth stretching wide in that inhuman scream, and my legs almost buckled. No, I wasn't going to be stupid. When the clock neared 3, the air in the store grew heavy, thicker somehow, like humidity had seeped in through the walls. The lights above flickered once, twice, and then steadied again. I sat on the stool, staring at the stockroom door, trying not to blink. The first knock came at exactly 3:05. Not at the front door this time. At the stockroom. I froze. My heart stuttered. The knock was slow. 3 thuds, heavy, deliberate. I stared, unable to move, every instinct in me screaming to run, though I had nowhere to go. The knock came again, louder, and then a voice muffled but clear. Help me, please. It wasn't the woman's voice this time. It was a man's, deep, rough. I gripped the edge of the counter until my nails dug into the wood. Please, the voice repeated, more urgent now. They locked me in. Let me out. I wanted to cover my ears, but I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the floor. The doorknob rattled suddenly, the sound sharp in the dead quiet of the store. I gasped, stumbling backward, nearly tripping over the stool. The knocking grew frantic, fists slamming against the wood, shaking the frame. Let me out, the voice roared, furious now, shaking the door with each pound. I clamped my hands over my ears, shaking my head, whispering to myself over and over, don't open it, don't open it. And then as the clock struck 3:33, the noise stopped. Silence. The air seemed to lift, lighter somehow, though my chest still heaved with ragged breaths. My shirt clung to me with sweat. I sank to the floor, trembling, my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. I had obeyed. I had survived. But I realized something then, something that made my blood run cold. The voice had said, they locked me in. They, which meant whoever, or whatever, was behind that door wasn't alone. And there were more rules ahead I hadn't faced yet. I didn't sleep after that first night. When Carl came in to relieve me at sunrise, I must have looked like death itself. Eyes bloodshot, hands trembling, the smell of stale sweat clinging to my clothes. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't have to. The look he gave me said enough. He knew. He'd been through it himself. You made it, he muttered, setting his thermos down on the counter. His voice was almost casual, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of relief, maybe even surprise. I opened my mouth to ask him what the hell was going on in that store, but before the words could come out, he cut me off. Don't ask. Don't think about it too much. Just show up, follow the rules, and get your paycheck. That's it. I stared at him, wanting to scream, to demand an explanation. But instead, I just nodded. Maybe because I was too exhausted to fight, or maybe because some part of me already knew that any answer I got would only make things worse. By the time I got home, I collapsed straight into bed. But sleep didn't bring relief. My dreams were thick with shadows, with the sound of fists pounding on doors, with faces pressing against glass. Every time I woke, my heart was hammering, convinced for a split second that I was still in the store. When night came again, I found myself back in that gravel lot, staring at the flickering neon sign of Midway Mart. My chest tightened as I unlocked the door, the bell chiming hollowly overhead. The air inside smelled the same. Stale coffee, mop water, and that faint metallic tang that seemed stronger now. The rules glared at me from the bulletin board. I didn't need to read them again, but my eyes kept drifting toward them anyway, like they had a pull of their own. By midnight, I'd locked the door, the metallic click echoing in my skull like the toll of a bell. This time, no one knocked. The glass stayed empty, and the lot outside stretched silent into the dark. But the phone rang again. I waited. First call, 6 rings. It stopped. Second call. I picked it up with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Hello? My voice was barely a whisper. Static again. Thick, oppressive. Then that same low voice. Good, you're learning. I gripped the receiver tighter. "What do you want from me?" No answer, just a faint crackle then. "Don't forget the television." Click. The line went dead. I turned slowly toward the counter where the small boxy TV sat. It was old, probably from the 80s, its plastic casing yellowed with age. I remembered the rule. At 4:15, turn it on. Leave it on. I tried not to think about it, but my stomach twisted every time my eyes landed on the dark screen. What was supposed to happen if I didn't turn it on? The hours crawled. I stocked shelves, I wiped the counter, I did anything I could to make the time move faster. At 3, I sat frozen again, waiting for the stockroom noises to return. But the door stayed quiet. No knocks, no voices. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was on the other side, listening, waiting. By the time 4:15 rolled around, my nerves were shredded. I stood in front of the TV, remote in hand, the clock ticking over. The second the minute hand struck, I pressed the power button. The screen lit up in a burst of static. White noise hissed through the speakers, loud and grating. I flinched, lowering the volume, but the static didn't change. No channels, no signal, just snow. I turned to walk away, but then froze. There was something in the static. At first, I thought my eyes were just playing tricks on me, but the longer I stared, the more certain I became. Shapes were moving in the snow. Not random fuzz, but patterns. Outlines. Faces. They flickered in and out, warped and twisted by the static, mouths opening and closing like they were screaming silently. Eyes that seemed to bore straight into mine. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the stool. My chest clenched so tight I could barely breathe. The faces kept shifting, morphing, multiplying until the screen was filled with them. Some looked human. Others didn't. And then one face pressed closer than the rest, its features sharpening out of the blur of static until I could see it clearly. It was the woman from the door. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide and unblinking. Her mouth opened slowly, impossibly wide, filling the screen until it was nothing but blackness. The TV went dead. I stood there in the silence, my pulse thundering in my ears. The screen was dark now, just a blank reflection of my pale, terrified face. I wanted to smash the thing, to rip it from the counter and throw it across the room. But I remembered the rule: leave it on, even if the screen shows static. So I turned it back on. The faces didn't return, just the snow, hissing endlessly. I sat down behind the counter, staring at it until the sun finally rose, my mind unraveling with the sound of that static searing into me. That was only my second night. By the third night, I had already begun to dread the routine. My body felt heavier with each step as I crossed that gravel lot, the neon sign flickering like a dying heartbeat above the entrance. Inside, the air was the same. That sour smell of stale coffee and something metallic beneath it. I'd come to think of it as the store's real perfume, the kind that sticks to you even after you leave. Carl had already gone when I arrived. No warning, no instructions, just silence. The rules on the bulletin board seemed brighter somehow, like the fluorescent lights were spotlighting them. I didn't need to read them anymore, but my eyes were drawn to them anyway. It was like they were alive, whispering, "Don't forget us." By midnight, I locked the door. I was already bracing myself for the phone. First ring. Stop. Second ring. Answer. The static was waiting for me. "Good," the voice rasped. "You've done well, but you're not alone tonight." Click. I slammed the phone down, bile rising in my throat. Not alone. What did that mean? I moved behind the counter, staring at the door, the aisles, the shadows pooling at the edges of the store. The fluorescent lights hummed louder than usual, their buzzing drilling into my skull. At 12:30, I saw him. Through the front glass doors, in the middle of the empty lot, a man was standing. He was tall, too tall maybe. His shoulders stooped in a way that made his body look stretched, elongated. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, tilted low so his face was hidden in shadow. His hands hung at his sides, unnaturally long, unmoving. I froze. He wasn't there a moment ago. "Just don't open the door," I whispered to myself, my fingers trembling against the counter. "Just don't open it." The man didn't move, didn't knock, didn't even tilt his head. He just stood there, perfectly still, like a scarecrow planted in the gravel. Minutes passed, then an hour. Every time I glanced up, he was there, the same position, unmoving, watching. By 2 a.m., my nerves were shredded. My coffee sat cold on the counter, untouched. I couldn't look away from him for long, but when I did, When I blinked too slowly or turned to grab something, I swear he was closer. Only a few feet each time, but enough to notice. By 2:45, he was standing just outside the door. I staggered back, nearly knocking over the stool. My breath came in sharp gasps. His face was still shadowed by the brim of that hat, but I could feel his eyes on me. Cold, empty, like twin voids pressing into my skin. He raised a hand slowly, deliberately, and pressed it against the glass. His fingers were too long, the nails yellow and cracked. The glass groaned under the pressure, though he wasn't knocking, just waiting. I gripped the counter, my knuckles white, whispering over and over, "Don't open it! Don't open it!" At 3, the knock came, but not from the man. The stockroom door rattled behind me. I whipped around, heart in my throat. The pounding started again, fists slamming against wood, voices shouting, "Let us out, please!" The sound of dozens of fists this time. Not just one man, but many. The whole door shook, hinges straining. I clamped my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth, whispering to myself, 33 minutes, just 33 minutes. When I looked back at the front glass, the man in the hat was gone. The lot stretched empty again, as if he'd never been there. But the pounding behind me didn't stop. At 3:15, the voices grew louder, overlapping, dozens of them screaming, pleading, snarling. Some sounded human, some didn't. At 3:25, the doorknob turned slowly, rattling, metal screeching. I pressed my back against the counter, praying it would hold. At 3:33, silence fell. The sudden absence of sound was worse than the noise itself. When I finally looked up, the stockroom door stood still, quiet. But on the glass of the front door, where the man in the hat had stood, a single handprint remained, pressed deep into the glass. 5 long fingers stretched too wide to be human. I didn't clean it off. I couldn't. I didn't tell anyone about the man in the hat. When Carl showed up in the morning, sipping his thermos like always, he didn't ask how the night went. He just glanced at me, then at the handprint still smeared on the front glass. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He set his thermos down, adjusted his cap, and muttered, "You're still breathing. That's what matters." I wanted to ask him, who was that man? Why didn't he come inside? But the words stuck in my throat. Deep down, I already knew Carl wouldn't answer. Or maybe he couldn't. I stumbled through the daylight hours in a daze, dozing on the couch with the TV on low, afraid of closing my eyes, afraid of dreaming. When dusk fell, I found myself back at that store again, staring at its flickering neon glow like a moth drawn to a flame. The smell hit me harder this time. That metallic tang was stronger, almost coppery, like blood. I pushed the thought away and locked the door at midnight. The phone came right on time. First call, stop. Second call, static. Good, the voice whispered, but there's more you must learn. I gripped the receiver tight. Who are you? Why are you doing this? No answer, only a pause. Then, softer now, when the third call comes, you must not answer. Click, the line went dead. I stood frozen, the receiver still clutched in my hand. Third call? That wasn't on the rules pinned to the bulletin board. The paper said nothing about a third call. My chest tightened. Was the list incomplete? Or was the voice adding new rules just for me? I replaced the phone slowly, eyes darting to the aisles, the doors, the shadows in the corners of the store. The silence pressed heavier now, like the building itself was holding its breath. At 1 a.m., I heard movement. Not the stockroom this time, not the glass doors. From the candy aisle. I crept closer, heart hammering, every instinct screaming at me to stay behind the counter. But I had to know. The aisle stretched empty, bags of chips and candy bars lined neatly on the shelves. But halfway down, one of the bags began to crinkle, like invisible fingers were pressing into it. The plastic twisted and shifted, crunching softly. Then another bag, 2 shelves down. Then another. Like something was walking through the aisle, brushing its hand along the shelves, but nothing was there. I staggered back, bumping into a rack of soda bottles. The sound of clinking glass echoed too loud, and the crinkling stopped. Silence. I held my breath. Then, from the end of the aisle, a voice whispered my name. Not shouted, not spoken, whispered, drawn out like a hiss. I know you. I bolted back to the counter, nearly tripping over my own feet. My chest burned, my lungs struggling to pull in air. The phone rang. I froze. Third call. It rang 6 times, shrill and deafening in the dead air. I clamped my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth. Don't answer, don't answer, don't answer. The ringing stopped. For a moment, relief washed through me. I'd made it. I'd followed the new rule. But then, faintly, from the receiver came the sound of static. It wasn't ringing anymore. The phone wasn't even off the hook. But through the line, I could hear it. And then my own voice. "Hello," it said. I staggered back, shaking my head violently. No, no, that wasn't possible. "Who are you?" My voice continued, distorted, echoing. "Why are you doing this?" The exact words I'd spoken earlier. Then laughter, low, rasping, inhuman. The line went dead. I stood in the silence, my hands trembling so badly I could barely stay upright. That was when I realized the rules weren't just about keeping things out. They were about keeping me in. And something out there, or maybe in here, was learning me. The following night, I went into work with a gnawing unease that seemed to start the second I stepped out of my car. The neon sign buzzed faintly overhead, and for the first time, I noticed that it wasn't just buzzing, it seemed to flicker in a deliberate rhythm. 3 short flashes, pause, 2 longer ones, like a code. I shook it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but it already set my nerves on edge before I even touched the door handle. Inside, the air felt different. The stale smell of dust and coffee grounds still lingered, but beneath it was something new, something sweet and coppery, like syrup mixed with blood. The store was quiet, too quiet, as if the hum of the coolers had been turned down. My skin prickled at the silence. I went to the counter and unfolded the rules list again. My eyes immediately caught something I hadn't noticed before. At the bottom, scribbled in handwriting much shakier than the neat typewritten instructions, was an additional line. It hadn't been there last night. It said, "Do not look in the bathroom mirror after 1:47 a.m. I blinked at it, wondering if it was a prank, maybe another employee trying to mess with me. But the handwriting didn't look recent. The ink looked smudged, as if it had been written a long time ago. The shift dragged, as always. The same things kept happening. The man at the pumps who vanished into thin air, the faceless girl who stood outside at 2 a.m., her long hair swaying even when there was no wind. Each night, they appeared like clockwork, and each night I forced myself to follow the rules. I didn't look at the man. I didn't open the door for the girl. I didn't question anything. But that night, the smell coming from the bathroom was unbearable. By 1:30, it had grown so strong that I gagged when I walked past the door. It wasn't sewage. It wasn't chemical. It was the smell of rotting meat, like something had been left inside to decay. I tried to ignore it, but when 1:47 crept closer, I felt the pull. Something inside me needed to see what was in there, even though the rules screamed not to. I thought about how the handwriting looked. Desperate. Like whoever wrote it wanted to warn me from experience. At 46, I was pacing behind the counter, staring at the bathroom door as if it were a living thing. My stomach turned, and sweat dripped down my neck. I told myself not to move, not to give in. But when the clock ticked to 1:47, I felt my legs carrying me forward as if they weren't mine. The handle was freezing cold. My reflection in the metal looked distorted, warped, like I was looking at a funhouse mirror. I twisted the knob and opened the door. The bathroom light was already on. The mirror above the sink was fogged over, though the room was bone dry. And something was moving inside the glass. It wasn't my reflection. The figure staring back at me wore my face, but its skin was gray, its eyes hollow sockets filled with writhing shadows. Its mouth stretched into a grin that was far too wide, revealing teeth that looked more like jagged shards of glass. It raised a hand slowly, deliberately, and pressed it against the glass. My reflection didn't move with me. It moved on its own. And then, with a crack like shattering ice, the mirror surface rippled. The thing inside began pushing through. If you think this night was terrifying, wait until you see what comes next. Don't wander too far, my night owls. The story isn't done with you yet.